Hey guys, Liam here with 30K Esports, here to bring you a tier list based on offlaners. This is just a generic tier list, so not specifically for Storm League or competitive, just more of a generic tier list for either or whatever's applicable to you. I'm joined by Legacy, my teammate on 30K.
Hey everyone, happy to be here talking to you about the offlane today.
So we're just going to go through each of these heroes, as I'm sure you can see alphabetically. We're just going to go through them. So first here we have Artanis. Artanis is actually one of the main heroes that I played when I very first started offlane. I kind of spammed him in Storm League, so I do like Artanis. I would say one of the biggest problems with Artanis is his wave clear is very low, and he's very susceptible to being ganked because doesn't really have any escape, any reliable escape, I should say. So probably going to be lower on this tier list. I would probably be looking somewhere like D or maybe even F. What do you think, Legacy?
Yeah, I'd agree with you. I think you hit some of the points where he lacks wave clear compared to some of the other offlane counterparts, and so in a lot of the maps you'll see offlaners needing a double soak, things like that. So I think Artanis generally seems to be played more on two-lane maps, especially when you look at Battlefield of Eternity with amateur opponent,
True.
things like that. But definitely a more situational type of hero. So I'd agree with you. Something, we can move things around as we go if
Yeah.
deemed necessary, but probably start with
Yeah.
D for that.
Yeah. D seems good for now. Yeah.
All right.
So next we have Arthas, another very niche hero. Good into auto attackers, obviously, but again struggles similarly with the wave clear department. Uh, can go because he has to use his E for the wave clear. Can be good against a lot of auto attackers though. Another 2-lane map offlaner, I would say, generally, or maybe like a big map like Cursed Hollow. If you see a ton of auto attackers, probably not too high though. Maybe like C, I'd say.
Yeah, I think it's something where similar to the struggles we talked about with Artanis, the wave clear is a really big issue. And to me, it seems like haven't really seen a ton of Arthas. He does have pretty good strength into you talked about auto attackers and heavy melee comps. Um, I was probably leaning something like D, but you can.
Yeah, I think the thing about Arthas is if you pick him in a good situation, like in a bunch of auto attackers, he can be pretty good. But
Mhm.
obviously, if you don't pick him in that situation, he's going to be really bad. So I think if you pick him in the right scenarios, in the right maps, I would put him in uh, C or D. We can always move later on, but I'd say
Yep,
for now, C is good.
sounds good.
Uh, Next, we have Blaze, everybody's favorite offlaner. Very fun to play. Uh, Easy S tier. Not much to be said. His wave clear is insane. He can siege towers for free at level 1 with his Q doing burst damage. He has one of the best ultimates in the game. Bunker being absolutely insane in team fights. He does insane burst damage post 13, even pre 13 with his Q burst damage. Um, Very good utility because his W has the attack speed reduction or spell power reduction at level 7. Just also very ungankable because of Bunker and his kit in general.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you think about what you want in an offlaner, Blaze pretty much has everything. He's able to, you know, double soak really well. He's nearly ungankable. Very high self-sustain. He can do camps fairly fast. So, I think about all that from an offlane perspective, and then, when you bring him in the team fight, he's got, like you mentioned, slows, stuns. He's got bunker for your team, so just overall a ton of utility. So I think that's probably the easiest selection we have that he
Yep.
goes in S.
I think he does pretty much everything about as good as anybody does like one thing. So like,
Hmm.
yeah, super good offlaner. Next we have Chen. Chen is particularly good on the 1v1 maps like Braxis or Dragonshire because he is good at 1v1ing. He is somewhat susceptible to being ganked though, especially pre-level 10. Not as susceptible as like Artanis or something though. So he could be very good at brawling. There's not really a pick that hard counters him, except for like maybe Leoric, but you can even outplay it by dodging the drains. He's very good at brawling, but again, he lacks the wave clear, so he can't really double soak at all. He can't even clear really anything. His camp clear is very bad. So I think that's why you don't really see him in competitive, but I think he's very viable in Storm League and even in some situations in competitive. I'd probably put him in maybe C or B.
Yeah, I agree. I think when I think of offlaners that aren't really played too often, but are still decently strong, he's one of the first that comes to mind. I think he has multiple ult choices that can really be huge in team fights. Whether you're looking at kegging someone into your team, thinking of if there's a Stukov or Anduin or something like that, or a fragile backliner, you can just keg into your team, or pandas that you can go in with your team and dive.
Yep.
Uh, he can bring a lot of strong elements into team fights, but as you mentioned, the wave clear a little lacking. I think when I think of Chen of like strong maps and where you'll sometimes see him, I feel like Dragonshire comes to mind as a map that he's generally particularly good on, since a lot of times you'll see the top lane on Dragonshire be a little more isolated, even though it's a 3-lane map. I think once you get into competitive, you see more rotations, but when we're looking at Storm League, a lot of times you'll see those top laners left alone a lot, so he tends to get more value.
Yeah, agreed. I think another good thing to note is Keg is very good at like point control. So any map with like a boss, for example, Bractus, I love it on because it makes that boss fight so much easier with the Keg. So it's definitely has its situations where he's good.
Absolutely.
Next we have Deathwing. Deathwing, another very situational offlaner, uh, susceptible to percent damage like Leoric, Malthael, Tychus, Mephisto is a great one. Um, his wave clear is much better than the other offlaners we've talked about, so he does have that going for him. But I say he's more of like a last pick hero because of those counters. Because if you're playing him into one of those counters, it can feel really bad. But if you have him as like a last pick or something, I think he can be very good, especially into heroes like Rexxar, for example, because Rexxar relies on those stuns. Same with Junkrat. Garrosh, any hero that relies on stunning.
Yeah, I'd agree that to me, Deathwing seems like something you pick late in the draft. Once you've already seen um, a fair amount of what the other team has, and if they're lacking, the tools to deal with Deathwing, sometimes the Deathwing can just feel completely unkillable. So I think it's pretty underrated. I think it can be played in the 4-man or the offlane. But from an offlane specific standpoint, I guess in my mind, I'd be thinking around that like C tier. I don't know.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree. I think one of the main problems with Deathwing is he's competing with like other insane offlaners like Blaze that we talked about. So it's hard to justify picking him unless you're holding for last pick. But if you're holding offlane for last pick, that's often not very good. So definitely very situational, but in the right situations, he can be absolutely insane. Next, we have Dehaka. Dehaka is still extremely good. He got nerfed recently. He got his CD nerfed a little bit, but he's still insane. He has the global value, obviously, which is a big factor. He has, with his speed build, he can just zoom at people, get the drags. His wave clear is very good post 13 with the W talent. Um, Very good at soaking, especially with that speed build. I know Qhira likes the tissue regen build, which helps the 1v1ing a little bit, but I like the speed generally, just because it helps the double soak, and in team fights it's very powerful. Drags can sometimes just win you the game, and then not to mention isolation, especially at level 20, can just win you the game automatically if you get a big ISO. Just a very strong ultimate in general.
Yeah, I think Dehaka is very strong. I think he has enough flexibility in his kit that he can be played a few different ways. I know you talked about, whether you build for speed and try to get into the backline and hit the drags easier. There's also, like you said, the tankier build. Uh, we've seen some players that will go, isolation. You can hit a big contagion to just win late game team fights, as well as we've also seen some Dahakas that will go adaptation and basically just live in the backline forever and cause a lot of disruption. So I think he can be played, a few different ways depending on what the
Yeah,
need is, and any time a hero has a global, they're going to be bumped up in priority and how much they can provide to a team. So when I think of Dehaka, I think of him as like a S or an A.
yeah, I completely agree. I'd put him in S for now, I think. Another thing I forgot to mention is you can go the spell armor level 1 as well. That's what I used to go, the old build. I think it's still good if there's a lot of mages, can get a lot of value out of that. But yeah, I think he's S tier for now. We can always move it if it
Mm-hmm.
looks like it should be moved. Next we have D.Va. D.Va was for a long time kind of at the top of the meta, super good. Unfortunately, she got nerfed many times, or maybe it was just one big nerf, but it did seem to hurt her wave clear uh, very much, and it's kind of made her have a much harder time double soaking. So D.Va's gone down a lot in prio, especially with heroes like Blaze Dehaka being as good as they are. It's hard to justify picking D.Va, but there are some situations where it can be good. For example, like Infernal Shrines, you have her value on the shrine, obviously, because you have the bomb, which can be very strong there. So in some situations, she's good. I think her biggest strength is that she is generally good at surviving ganks. So if you need like a safe offlaner that won't get picked, she's very good at that. She can kind of counter some of the meta offlaners like Dehaka. She can reduce his W damage, which hurts his wave clear. But generally, I think she's much weaker than others. I'd probably put her at around C.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think you touched on a lot of the things I was thinking of in terms of Diva seems pretty situational. It seems like her best maps are those that you can really get bomb value out of. So anything where you're fighting over a fixed point or objective, like Infernal Shrines, is where you're going to see, I think, her thrive the most. I think she also can be good in terms of like if you need an offlaner that uh, doesn't have to mount up. Like you said, she's pretty safe. Can clear pretty well. So I think she's definitely um, got places in the meta that she can be played, but would agree that right around C tier, which I think to me C when I look at it is basically the heroes that are good in specific situations.
Yeah, agreed. Very situational, but in the right situation can be insane for sure. Next we have ETC, which is a bit of an unconventional offlaner. I think sort of the only reason that he's even in the offlane option is because of stage dive, which gives him a global factor. As we talked about, globals sort of change the game, so that puts him in the offlane potential. He's very good at countering certain heroes. For example, like auto attackers, you have block party, which is very good into auto attackers. And on maps where you don't need like insane wave clear, like 2-lane maps like BOE or something, or just big maps like Garden of Terror or Cursed Hollow, you can get that global value. He's also good at countering, specific like combos like Yrel jump. He can boop that out of the air. Just in general, his disruption is pretty strong. So again, a very situational pick. I'd probably put him in C as well.
Yeah, I think as we mentioned with Dehaka, ETC, being able to tech into a global, if you're ever in need of that, I think you mentioned the exact times when I think of it, or on those bigger maps like Cursed Hollow, Garden of Terror, things like that. I think he's really good into a lot of the meta offlaners. Like you mentioned, ETC can boop away the Yrel jump. Can also do that to Blaze charge, things of that nature. So
And Dehaka drag.
yep.
That's another
So
one. Yeah.
so I think that's something where I'd almost lean even into B, but I think I'm uh, one of the maybe lesser people, the minority in terms of people that really like ETC right now. So probably go with you and put ETC in C, but to me, I think ETC is uh, underpicked or
Yeah,
underutilized at the moment.
I'd agree with that. We can always move him around.
Hmm.
I think he is very situational, which is why I lean C. But we'll see as we go on.
Yep.
Next we have Gazlowe. Gazlowe, he was super strong for a long time. I don't know if you guys remember, but there was like a meta where Gazlowe was like first pick, first ban for a while because he got insane buffs basically. He was nerfed very hard though since then, so we haven't seen him pretty much at all. I think he's been in like one CCL game this season, although I don't think they won that game. I don't play much Gazlowe to be honest, but I know he has good wave clear. He can be pretty strong in team fights, especially post 20 with the Gravo bomb, or even if you don't have Gravo, you can do the E charges for the CC chain. Pretty good with the CC, and he's generally pretty safe, I would say. I think his biggest weakness is honestly just the numbers are just too low. He doesn't do enough damage. His wave clear is pretty good, but again, just the team fight damage I think is the biggest weakness for him. I'd probably lean, D, maybe even F, just solely because of the stats that he has.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think it's something where, you mentioned his like game spikes, especially, I think of Gazlowe's strength if they tech into it. The bombs at 20 where you can just get tons of stun value, and really try to chain CC people. But yeah, overall from a damage perspective and numbers perspective, he seems a little undertuned. I'll maybe put him in D for now, and he
Yeah,
can
that
adjust.
sounds good. All right, next we have Hogger, the newest hero, I believe. I believe he was the newest release, but he's been out for a while now. Sort of solidified his place in the meta. Um, his wave clear is insane. He's essentially ungankable. Team fights really depends on how your spins turn out, if you can get the good angles. But if you do, it's absolutely insane, especially with Pummel at 13. You reduce all that spell power, you slow everybody a bunch. Um, Shockwave is an insane team fight ultimate. So is Hortipole if you can get those angles. I think his biggest strength is how fast he is at wave clearing, how he can sort of brawl any hero and do fine because of his, really good self sustain. So I'm leaning probably S or A. I would say S though if you're playing him optimally.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think he's a really strong hero, especially. I know you mentioned some of the things, but really looking at how fast he can and independent he can be in terms of camp clear.
True. Yeah.
Especially if you're looking at this from a Storm League perspective, sometimes it can be hard to get teammates to help on camps. So if it's nice to have that independent character that can really do them all by themselves and not lose waves and things like that because it takes too long.
Yeah, camps is a great point I forgot to mention. He's very good at camps, very good on any really point control, but even like boss points, the spin is extremely strong. Similar to even with Blaze, I didn't mention his camp is very strong, especially post level 4. So being able to do camps is obviously always a big bonus for an offlaner. So definitely a good point. Next we have Illidan. Illidan, another very niche hero. Very counterable by a lot of CC in general, or blinds, slows. But in the right situation, he can be good. Generally on big maps where you can get global value because he has hunt for that global. Also, a classic camp doer, very good at doing all camps, which I think is one of his biggest strengths. But he is definitely, he's kind of just like a worse Hogger, honestly, the more I think about it. I say his biggest strength is punishing heroes like Vikings, for example, because he can hunt them down and he can hit buildings very hard. I'd probably put him in around D, maybe C, just because of his, how hard he is to, or how easy he is to counter, I should say.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think it's something where, you mentioned the Vikings, him being able to, push and punish that. I think, when I think of Illidan, it's something where it would have to be, a late pick in the draft and really be into like
Yeah.
perfect situations. And when I think also about just offlane matchups in general, it seems like well, maybe not all, but most of the matchups that are Illidan favored are against offlaners that aren't really played right now or aren't that meta. It seems like versus the meta off lanes, he doesn't really, do that well, or he's behind, or things like that. So I'd agree. I think something maybe around that C or D tier as well.
Yeah, let's do D for now, and then we can always adjust it.
Yeah, I guess I look at
Uh,
this as we have a few heroes on here, and I'll ask your perspective if you were just in a specific game. Would you rather have Illidan or Arthas? I guess to me, I'd rather have an Illidan on my team, but so I'd maybe swap those. But I think that's just
yeah,
me looking at it.
that's true. I think it's just they're both very niche and like in
Hmm.
the right scenario. I think like Illidan can be very good if there's not a lot of blinds or slows. Arthas can be very good into auto attackers. We can move up to the C tier though. I think he's not that bad, and even in like not amazing situations, I think he can be good. If it's like a very big map, for example. Also good at doing those camps, as we talked about. But yeah, he does get countered by a lot in the meta currently. And as you said, a lot of the non-meta offlaners like Malthael or Leoric, not as meta. Those are kind of like what he excels against. So definitely just not a great meta for him, I would say, but definitely viable as well. Next we have Imperius. Imperius, I think, is actually very underrated right now. It's one of the only offlaners I don't really play currently, though, so I don't have too much insight on him. But I do know that his wave clear sort of struggles until a little bit later. I think he gets a wave clear talent around 4 or maybe 7, but it still struggles compared to other offlaners. So you generally see him on like the 2 lane maps or the brawl maps, like Dragonshire, Braxis, kind of similar to Chen, or Battlefield, for example. He is very strong in team fights, and he's good at countering those like tanky heroes because he has percent damage. But I'm leaning probably C tier because of his no wave clear is always a struggle.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I'd agree with you that Imperius is overall underrated. To me, once he gets that wave clear at 7, like you mentioned, I think he can wave clear with, keep up with wave clear with most heroes. I think you'll see him primarily be most effective on those 2 lane maps though, because uh, a lot of the times the early game is when you see the offlaner double soaking a lot, and since he struggles with that, typically his best maps are those 2 lane maps. But I think he's really strong and underrated as well. I'd
Yeah,
probably say
maybe
B
more of a
tier.
B. Yeah, I agree thinking back on it. Yeah, I think he is definitely underrated. Yeah, B looks good. Next we have Johanna. Johanna was absolutely insane a few months ago, and then she received some nerfs. Not too many though. I think it was mostly just a falling sword and a little bit of damage tuning, but she still is extremely strong. More of a main tank generally, but she can be in the off lane on like those big maps like Cursed Hollow, Garden, or really any map honestly. Like Infernal Shrines is another one where you see it a lot. It's especially good paired with something like Diablo because if you have a Diablo, the enemy team usually tries to counter it with like a Tychus or a Greymane. But if you have that Johanna off lane, you can blind the counters. So pretty good there. And she just generally, her whole kit is pretty strong. The blinds are going to always be pretty useful. Bless Shield's a very strong ult, same with Falling Sword in the right scenario. So another very situational hero, but I think in the right situation, I'd put her around B, maybe even A, just because of her high damage numbers and how strong her kit is in general.
Yeah, I think when you look at, all the things you want in an offlaner in terms of like wave clear, survivability, impact in team fights later on, Johanna's definitely up there with the best of them. I think wave clear is, not quite in the S tier. I think pretty much everything else, though, in terms of survivability, team fight, impact, things like that, I think she's up there. So I think I would probably put her at A.
Yeah, I think her biggest weakness is that wave clear for the early game, especially because it can
Hmm.
like use a lot of her mana to have to deal with those waves. But I think once you scale into the late game, it's less relevant. You have easier wave clear because obviously your damage is scaling, and then in team fights, it's obviously extremely strong. So I think the A tier is good as long as you're picking it in the right scenario. Definitely extremely strong. Next we have Kerrigan. Kerrigan, not many people play her in the off lane, but I actually was one of the main people, at least in NA, who started playing her in the off lane. I used to play her a lot. Don't play her as much nowadays, just because you have all the super meta offlaners. But she pretty much does what you need. Her wave clear is very strong. She actually wants to be wave clearing for those stacks at level 4. So generally, you have her offlaning even if she's not like technically the off lane, if she's like a 4-man pick. But I think you can have her in the off lane. Biggest weakness is she's very gankable, so you have to be very safe when you're doing that in the off lane. But same strength as in the 4-man. Once you get those stacks done, she's extremely strong in team fights. And post level like 13, she's hard to gank, especially because she'll have that burst damage. She can even turn and get a kill if you're not careful about it. Uh, but because of the susceptibility to ganks, I'd probably put more around C because you're gonna have to really pick her in the perfect scenario. And if it's not the perfect scenario, it's gonna be pretty tough.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. In terms of C tier, I think she has. I think you hit on the exact point of I think that gankability and lack of survivability early um, kind of offsets the team fight power that she can bring later. Um, but yeah, I think right around C is where I would put her.
I would give her some bonus points for Storm League effect. I think in Storm League you can get away with being like greedy because you're usually not going to get punished by being ganked in Storm League most of the time. And she is extremely strong in the team fights if you can land those combos with the burst damage from her Qs. So if you're in Storm League, I think you can really abuse her. But in general, in comp especially, it's very hard to get value from her. So I like her at C. Next we have Leoric, classic offlaner. Very good at countering those tanky offlaners or tanky frontliners like Diablo. Very good at clearing waves. Another very flexible hero. You can kind of build into whatever you want. You can build into drain build, which is going to be great for the frontliners, or you can do auto build, which is also great into frontliners. But if they have like no blinds or something, then it can be even stronger than drain build. You also have E build, which is very good at reducing all that damage. So I hear that you can really, build into whatever you want for the specific game. He is very bullyable. Is the one like one of the main downsides, I'd say. So if there's like a Falstad or a Genji or a Tracer, you can kind of get bullied as Leoric. It's very hard to uh, lane versus them or even deal with them at all, even in the later game. But his Entomb is extremely strong, especially post level 20 when you get that silence Entomb. Can kind of just win games right there. Specifically on maps like Infernal Shrines, he can clear the shrine very fast, which is what makes him super good on that map. So I'm leaning more like probably a B tier.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, just off the bat, like B or A came to mind. You mentioned just the flexibility in his builds. He has pretty good survivability in terms of he has self-sustain, he has his E that he can get away from trouble with if you do get ganked. I think, in addition to Infernal Shrines you mentioned, I think Tomb is another map that he's very good on.
Yeah, true.
I think it's something where he's able to clear the spiders if the other team gets them, especially if you tuck into the level 4 pretty well. So I think from an overall standpoint, I think B is a solid place for him.
Yeah, another thing to note is he has very good matchups into most offlaners, like Blaze, Hogger, Dehaka, all of those he has good matchups into. Maybe even matchup with Dehaka because he can dodge the drain. But Hogger, Blaze, very strong matchups. So definitely very good in the 1v1. But the biggest weakness is just that he can't really lane against ranged heroes. But if you can deal with it or have people help you out, then it's definitely very strong in team fights. Next we have Maiev. So another non-traditional offlaner, kind of similar to Kerrigan. Don't really see her much in the offlane, but I think it's something that can be done, especially in Storm League. I think this is more of a Storm League thing to have her in the offlane. Her wave clear is very strong. Similar to Kerrigan, she brings extremely strong team fight value. You can go into the cage or you can go into the disc. Disc is, recently got buffed, so it's extremely strong. It has the silence effect after, and the cooldown is very short. So strong in the team fights. Fan of knives, obviously, if you can land them. Just absolutely insane team fight value. Tether as well. But again, very situational, similar to Kerrigan. I'm probably leaning C for Maiev.
Yeah, I think I was leaning between C and D. I think pretty similar to Kerrigan and a lot of the fronts as you mentioned. Um, Not too much more to add on that. Put it in
Yeah,
C for now. But I'd say I definitely have not seen it
yeah,
too often. And I think that's due to a lot of the weaknesses that it does have. And I think more so than just it in itself surviving in the offlane and doing okay, it feels like sometimes it can put your, I guess from my perspective, it put your team comp potentially in an awkward spot if you're double ranged and like Maiev is really the only thing going in with your tank. To me, I think Maiev um, tends to be better with another bruiser in there or the offlaner in there and work better in the 4-man, but
yeah,
we'll
agreed.
see.
Next we have Malthael. Similar to Leoric, very good at bullying those tanky heroes. Generally good into melee comps. Good at countering heroes like Diablo with that last rites. Very good at doing camps as well. Another very good camper, similar to Hogger and Blaze. Also similar to Leoric though, in the sense that he can get very bullied by ranged heroes like Falstad, like Tracer, which I think is one of the main reasons we don't see him. Because in terms of pure team fight value, he does a lot of damage. His ult is very strong, be it last rites or tormented. If you go tormented, you can go the percent 16 and do like really good team fight damage. But if you're getting bullied all game in the off lane and you're having a hard time soaking, then team fights don't matter too much. So another very niche hero, but in the right scenario, definitely very strong. Just gotta be calling for help if you're getting ganked and stuff. So probably leaning B, very similar to Leoric, I would say.
Yeah, I would agree. I think I actually think Malthael is pretty strong and underplayed. I think he has pretty good matchups into nearly all the meta offlaners. Really, when I look at it, the main downside is the ability to be ganked and lack of survivability with that. So I think if your team is conscious and aware of it and make sure either gets help or call out rotations if they go to gank him, I think he can be a really strong hero. I was leaning like B or A, so can throw him in B for now.
Yeah, I think he is definitely a little underrated right now. He's actually, pretty strong, does a lot of damage in team fights. Next we have Murky. Murky in Storm League can be pretty good if you're, very good at Murky, like a Murky one trick. You can definitely get value from him. He's also good at countering heroes, like Leoric, like Malthael, who thrive on percent damage. Murky just doesn't have any, HP, so percent damage doesn't matter as much. In competitive though, very bullyable and just ultimately doesn't bring much to team fights, which at the end of the day, team fights is where the game's going to be decided at the highest level because macro in general, if you have like the traditional offlaners like Blaze or Hogger or Dehaka, macro is not really going to be a problem. You're going to be fine soaking, and it's going to come down to a team fight where Murky just doesn't bring too much. So I'm going to put him in the F tier. I would say F tier anyway. I don't know if you have any crazy, differing opinions.
No, I pretty much agree with you. I think when I think of it, definitely more of a Storm League hero. I think the best times to utilize Murky or where I've seen Murky get value is on bigger maps normally where you can out rotate. So if the enemy team picks an offlaner that doesn't have good wave clear, and you can get ahead in rotations, really get the insta clear on the waves and bully them from a wave clear perspective, and then whether it's stealing camps or rotating once you hit 10 and looking for an octa grab or march or something like that. That's where maybe you can get some value, but I think from a competitive standpoint, I don't really think it's very viable. So I would agree with F for Murky.
Yeah, definitely a play style that you can abuse in Storm League, but even then, it can be hard to get value out of if there's just one person answering you. So yeah, gonna be F tier. Next we have Qhira, which is actually a pretty interesting hero. Kind of doesn't get picked ever. Her wave clear is essentially abysmal, which is why it's hard to justify her in the off lane. But she is very good at brawling, 1v1ing people. Uh, Good counter to like Chen, for example, because he just sits there and drinks, and she, stacks up that whatever it's called. I forget the name of it. Is it Fury, maybe?
The I'm
I forget
blanking
the
out
name
too,
of
like
it.
the
But
bleed.
yeah, bleed effect. So she is good at the 1v1ing, but yeah, that wave clear suffering. I think she's actually a very high skill cap hero because she has the skill shot with her Q and then she has the skill shot with her E. It seems kind of like if you miss that E skill shot, she's kind of useless until it's back up. But if you can land it, she actually can get some decent value, especially post 16. But yeah, that wave clear is really her biggest problem. And also, if you miss that E, you're in big trouble for that downtime. So I'm probably leaning, maybe D or even F for Qhira.
Yeah, I think Qhira, when I've seen it, tends to be most effective on those two lane maps. Similar to Imperius, like we talked about before, kind of lacking wave clear and being better at brawling think Qhira is kind of in a similar situation where those 2 lane maps like Praxis or BOE, things like that, are generally where she'll bring the most value. Um, but typically, I would agree that while she can have some decent counter matches into a Chen or Rexxar, things like that, I would agree that something like D probably is where she would fall.
Yeah, that sounds good. I think she is not as bad as people think. I feel like a lot of people sort of just disregard her immediately. I don't think she's that bad. It's kind of one of those things where you have to put in so much effort just to achieve, not even as much as some of the other like higher tier offlaners.
Exactly.
So, yeah, very hard to get value from. Next we have Rag. Rag is I would say another underrated offlaner. I think he has that insta wave clear, very good at clearing waves. His biggest weakness is he's kind of very susceptible to being ganked. He's also not good at brawling. So like, for example, against Blaze or Hogger or really any of the meta offlaners, he's going to kind of get bullied by them. But if he can avoid them and just focus on the wave clear, he can even go into lava wave for that macro pressure, particularly in Storm League. That can be very strong on like the big maps like Garden or Warhead in Storm League. Um, very good macro hero. But in team fights though, it can be hard to get much value out of him unless you have like a really big molten core or something. So I'm leaning probably D, maybe C, but again, the biggest problem is he's just very weak in the 1v1s.
Yeah, I think you mentioned, especially from a Storm League perspective, Lava Wave can be a huge tool, especially on big maps. I think you can also, if you go into Sulfura Smash, can be a very good follow up for a comp that wants to one shot somebody. I think from an overall perspective, I would probably say C. I think we mentioned Rag's trait, being able to take over the fort, can be helpful for defense. I know we talked about big maps, but Tomb of the Spider Queen is another one where I think of Rag being pretty decent just at extending the game and making it really hard for the other team to end. Being able
True,
to
yeah.
trait the buildings as well as lava waves. So if you have Rag paired up with a comp that is really strong late game and Rag kind of extending the game, I think there can be situations where it can be decent. But yeah, definitely like looking at like C or D.
Yeah, we can keep him in C for now. I think he does have his situations, and Smash is also pretty good for team fights if you have like a really good setup like Judgment or something. I think there was a a season of CCL where a team would do like Judgment, Soul Smash exclusively, and they almost always got a kill with it. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it can be hard to end up capitalizing on those macro advantages or team fight advantages just because of his weak like overall team fight value, I would say. But yeah, definitely situational. Next we have Rexxar. Rexxar, another very good 1v1 hero. Actually, not bad in the team fights either with the Misha, kind of like a mini ETC with the power slide. Misha's very good at CCing in team fights, and also obviously he's very good at holding points 1v1 because you can put Misha on the point while Rexxar clears the waves. He is kind of susceptible to being ganked because of the fact that he doesn't really have any, movement capabilities until he gets Feign Death. That's sort of his only way to stay alive from ganks, but that's at 16. So early game, very bullyable from like a roamer like Genji or something. But I do think that he's actually very strong in team fights. So like the Misha CC is extremely strong. Hard to get value from him though, just because he is extremely bullyable outside of like the 1v1 maps like Dragonshire and Braxis Holdout. So I'm leaning probably around B, I would say.
Yeah, I think Rexxar can be really strong, especially when you look at point control maps like Dragonshire, Braxis, things like that, where Misha can, stay to the point while Rexxar clears the wave and really force your opponent into a lose-lose situation. Also, as you mentioned, Misha's stun uh, in late game team fights can be just a very safe but powerful form of engage to start a CZ chain, and then
Yeah, definitely.
especially boars at 20 with the root can be huge if you find a good flank or things like that. So definitely agree that Rexxar is strong. I'd say yeah, something in the A or B tier.
Yeah, I definitely think he's extremely strong. We'll talk about it a bit later, maybe A, but again, it's just hard to put him there when he's so susceptible to being ganked.
Hmm.
But let's go with B for now. So we have Samuro next. I don't really play Samuro. I've never played Samuro, but I think his biggest weakness from what I've seen from playing against him is, obviously wave clear is lacking until level 10 if you go Blade Storm, but then you have Blade Storm, which makes team fights very hard. So I think honestly Samura's biggest strength is just macroing all game. You just split push and you can't really get ganked because you just have a million blinks, and I have like the move speed bonuses and whatnot. I think his biggest strength is just macroing all game, and in Storm League, for example, it can be super annoying to play against and super valuable for you, especially if you have it with like an Abathur, for example, just like a full macro team. You can even play for team fights if you go for the Illusion Master, um, if that's what you want to play for. I just don't think it's his biggest strength unless you have specifically an Abathur. Then it can be hard to get value out of him just because he doesn't do that much damage. Honestly, I don't really know where to rate him. I feel like he's extremely situational. Maybe like D or C potentially.
Yeah, I think the main thing when I think of Samuro is just the survivability and how unkillable he can be, and really just annoy your team in terms of split pushing, and you try to gank him, and he's very hard to catch and actually kill. I think from a team fight perspective, I think there's a lot of other offlaners that bring a lot more to a team fight.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, I think he's very situational. Um, I'd probably say something like C or D. Um, maybe we'll put him
Maybe
in.
maybe C because
Uh,
I think if you're good at him, he can get a lot of value. It's just hard. He's hard to play, so you have to be very good at him, and it has to be the right draft for him. So it's just very situational, similar to the other C picks. Next we have Sonya. Sonya was extremely strong back when W build wasn't nerfed and it was doing insane damage. We had a lot of Sonyas. Since then, W build's been nerfed pretty hard. She's still good at the wave clear. She does get bullied by a lot of percent damage heroes. Kind of like the whole B tier there that we have. Sonya kind of gets bullied by all of them. Even some of the S tier like Dehaka, Blaze, Sonya just can't really keep up with in the wave clear department. She is also very susceptible to ganks, which is one of her main weaknesses. But in team fights, she can definitely bring a lot, especially if you go into Leap or even Wrath if you want to play more of the sustained fights and just staying alive, dealing consistent damage with Wrath, especially on maps like Infernal Shrines. You can just spin on those Shrine Guardians, or if you go Leap, you can go for the one shots with Leap, especially on any squishy comp, especially if they have no cleanse. Definitely a very situational hero again. Although I think she can get more value even if it's not in the most optimal situation. So I'm leaning probably B. I would say.
Yeah, I think she's definitely those nerfs hit her hard. Uh, to me, it still feels like the most impactful Sonyas are the ones that are W build with leap and going for that burst one shot style.
Agreed.
Wrath can
Yeah.
definitely get value sometimes, but it tends to, at least to me, to be the that leap is generally the one that gets the most value. I think a little less of Sonya right now. I would have probably said C, but I think when I look at the other ones in C, I feel like she's slightly above them.
Yeah.
So it feels like to me there'd be almost like she's either at the bottom of B or top of C kind of a thing.
Yeah. Agreed. I think we can, once we're done here, we can adjust it a little bit. But let's get on to Butcher next. Butcher is a very interesting hero. Really doesn't do much damage until you have the meat stacked up, which that's 200, minion kills, or I think you get 20 meat per hero kill, but it's very hard to kill heroes with Butcher because it doesn't really do much damage until he has that meat. So he does have a CC effect with his E. Point and click CC is always strong, especially paired with follow up CC. So he can be very good at getting ganks if he has a strong team following him, but very easy to bully, especially if the other team knows that there's a butcher. They're just gonna make sure he can't rotate effectively, or even kill him on the rotate because he can't really escape effectively. I think his biggest strength is Lamb to the Slaughter. The silence effect is extremely strong. Post level 20, you have the AOE effect, which hits everybody, which is like can just win the game on the spot if you get a good one. But very hard to stack up the meat, which is sort of what you need to do in order for him to actually do much damage. So gonna have to put him in F tier personally.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think survivability is on the low end, and really the character needs to be able to survive to get the meat stacked. And I think when you look at wave clear, it's it can be okay if you talent into it, but it's still not as good as the strong offlaners. And overall, you mentioned there is point click CC. I think that's one of his strengths, as well as uh, an AoE silence at 20. That the 20 lane of the slaughter can be extremely impactful, but I think from an overall perspective, I'd definitely say it's in like DRF.
Yeah. Another thing to mention is any blinds, any attack speed slow is going to make his life much harder. So just a very counterable hero. Doesn't bring too much usually. Next we have Vikings. Vikings are extremely annoying to play against and kind of break the game. Uh, Having three heroes in one lets you, soak everything, lets you, annoy the other offlaner with Eric, dismounting him, making it kind of miserable for them. Vikings is one of the heroes where extremely high skill cap. If you play him really well, I think he's absolute, or I should say they're absolutely insane. Even like I would say S tier if you're extremely good at them. Uh, there are some counters like Zeratul, Genji, Tracer can kind of hunt them down, but then you have to think about then you're leaving your 4 man and now they're only three, and now you have one hero being answered by two heroes, and now it just makes it so much harder for your 4 man. So extremely annoying hero. If you're good at him, I'd say A or S, but if you're not good at him, obviously going to be much worse. Just a extremely high skill cap. I'm probably leaning A, just because there are some counters.
Yeah, I think another thing that can be strong into it are characters that push really well. So I think you mentioned, one way to play against the Vikings are, with things like Zeratul and Genji, and that can, kill the Vikings and hunt them. But another way you can play is, to really get push value with, things like Sylvanas or Hammer that can take free walls, potentially free forts and get that early XP lead and translate that into a mid and late game lead. But for the most part, I would agree. I think that the Vikings, generally you won't see them unless they're played by someone who can play them at least decently well, and can micro them around and aren't going to be losing them too often. They're able to really help from a macro standpoint, just being able to soak all the waves. They can stall, whether it's like on towers
Towers
or
of Doom,
cursed,
yeah.
things like that. They can
Any
almost
objective, yeah.
permanently stall your objectives while enabling the 4-man to either find picks, look for push, things like that, whatever the value is that the 4-man is getting. So they really allow your team to do a lot of things. So I'd agree. I'd put them in A.
Yeah, agreed. Definitely extremely strong, extremely annoying to play against. Next we have Thrall. Another very good 1v1 hero, but does struggle with the wave clear department. So, Thrall, we've been seeing him a lot nowadays, but he is more of a 4-man hero. Definitely can be played in the offlane, but more of a 1v1 type offlaner, like on Braxis or Dragonshire, like the classic 1v1 maps. Maps where you don't really need wave clear too much. So like, any 2-lane map, kind of like BOE as well is a good example. Thrall's extremely strong. I mean, he brings percent damage, so very good against tanky comps. He also can sort of counter those dive heroes like Genji or Tracer because he doesn't really care about getting ganked, and he can kind of punish them in the team fights. He's kind of an unkillable target. Both of his ultimates, Sundering and Earthquake, both very strong team fight ultimates. Sundering has sort of been the meta nowadays because the CC it brings is very good. From the offlaner perspective, though, having the very low wave clear I think hurts him a lot. So as an offlaner, I'd probably put him in the C, maybe B department.
Yeah, when I think of Thrall, I think definitely his biggest weakness is the wave clear. Um, he's really good at brawling. He has percent damage, like you mentioned, and with the blood for blood at 7, really helps his survivability to ganks and such, if needed to use it for it. So really, when I think of Thrall as an offlaner, really the only thing I think is lacking is the wave clear. So yeah, I think
Yeah.
somewhere around that makes sense. I think of Thrall probably pretty similar to Sonya, in terms of like low B, high C. So
Yeah.
maybe throw it in B for now.
Yeah. B sounds good for now. Next we have Twin Blades Varian. Um, a very strong brawling hero. Once you can scale up that Twin Blades. Usually with Twin Blades you go the what is it called again?
High
High King's
King's
Quest.
Quest.
Yep, at level 1. Once you get that stacked up, it can be pretty strong. It does take a while to scale though. I think you need 5 hero kills is like the hardest part. But once you get that done, definitely good at the 1v1ing. Actually pretty hard to beat a 1v1 Varian, but biggest weakness is any ganks, he's just gonna fall over. He has no escape really. Wave clear is abysmal. Because of those two things, I think from an offlane perspective, gonna have to put him in like D, maybe even F tier, just because the wave clear is not there at all. He can get ganked extremely easy, as I said. So yeah, that's where I'm leaning.
Yeah, I think to me, I would say F just because I think the one thing you didn't really talk about is like team fights, and to me, Twin Blades will go in and auto, but really is not bringing like too much else to a team fight. You look at
Yeah, that's
the
true.
other offlaners. Yeah, I mean even the other ones in F are bringing in point and click CC to help the team, is where Varian's just kind of bringing in damage. But I think for me, what I'd be wanting more out of my offlane is utility, since your 4-man will probably have enough damage
Yeah, definitely not very strong in team fights unless you have a very specific comp. There was actually a comp that I used to run with, Twin Blades, and then you'd have Bloodlust, Rhaegar, so that would actually be pretty strong in the team fights, but unless you have a very specific, comp like that, just not going to bring very much. So I agree with the F tier, maybe D tier, but I think F is fine. um, just a very situational and usually not very strong hero. Next we have Zool. Zool has a ton of wave clear, extremely good at double soaking, probably the best double soaker in the game, I would say. Biggest weakness being he can get bullied by, the generic bulliers like Genji, for example. Definitely very bullyable because he doesn't have any movement tools. He does have the shield though, so he can usually stay alive unless he gets ganked by, multiples or if he's, not rotating very smart. But his wave clear is very strong, which, I think is very good for offlaners, obviously. His camp clear can be good once he scales up. And he does actually bring pretty good team fight value. He has the root, which is very strong. Post 20, you can go the healing reduction, or you can upgrade whatever ult you go. Both skeletal mages and poison nova are both very strong in team fights. Pretty good burst damage and AoE damage. So I think he's pretty good. I'm probably leaning B, maybe C tier, just because he is extremely, situational, as most of these are. Uh, that's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he definitely has some good tools. Uh, where I think of Zool probably the most is um, on Towers of Doom, soaking top mid. He can do that pretty effectively as long as he's not being harassed. Or on, a map like Garden
Sky Temple or something
or
as
Sky
well.
Temple, yeah. So I think he can get good value in those. I think depending on what ult you go, he can also get value in a few ways. Poison Nova can do a lot of damage if you're able to get it on a lot of the enemy team, or you can use the Skeletal Mages for some nice slows to set up your team. I think something like that, like C, maybe B tier, seems about right. Put it
Yeah,
in,
I think C is fair, just
yeah.
because he is very, gankable, as we talked about, very bullyable by a lot of, gankers. Also, he can get, kind of bullied in the 1v1 if like a Blaze or a Dehaka decides to like, go on him and sort of punish the fact that he doesn't really win 1v1s. Definitely can be a problem for him. So I think C is good. Definitely situational, can be very good, but you know, just has to be the right scenario. Next we have Yrel. I think we all know I like Yrel a lot. I think Yrel's pretty insane. I will say Yrel is one of the harder offlaners to play. I think you have to play her a lot to really, understand how to play her to her full potential. It's sort of an uncounterable offlaner. I talked about previously. I'd always talk about how playing into jump interrupts like ETC, like Lucio, anything that can interrupt that jump consistently is very annoying. But you can just spec into the W level 7 and not really care about that. And she is obviously very good at the wave clear, very good at the 1v1ing because you have Dauntless, you have the self sustain, so sort of just wins all the 1v1s and can keep up in the wave clear department. I personally would probably put her in S tier. I think she definitely is up there. The one thing that I think you can argue is how hard she is to play. Could potentially put her down in the A tier just because you really have to play her a lot to really have her be an S tier character. But I do think if you are super comfortable with her, she can definitely compete with those S tier offlaners.
Yeah, I think for me it's kind of I'm looking at like between S and A. I feel like Yrel, is pretty close to those S tier offlaners. I think in my mind slightly below. Maybe if it's Liam's Yrel, it's S. But I think to me, I think the other ones in S to me seem a bit stronger or tend to either be just overall easier to get value out of or more consistent with that. But I do
Yeah,
think Yrel is very strong and definitely on the edge, if not
I
an S.
I do think that something to note is like looking at the other S tiers, they're Blaze, Hogger, very good at the camps, which Yrel is not very good at all. Definitely a weakness for her is the camp capability. Dehaka is unique because he has the global, obviously. So yeah, Yrel not being able to do camps definitely hurts her a little bit. But I do think her team fight potential is absolutely insane, especially post 13, or I mean post 16 rather. You have the W talent, which is absolutely insane. I think one of the best 16s in the entire game. Percent damage reduces armor by 20, and you don't even have to fully charge it. It's a very short cooldown on the W as well, so I think that's sort of why like I was leaning higher. But I think A is completely fine because I do agree that not being able to do camps and the fact that she's so hard to play, not many people really play her at her full potential. So I agree, A is good to keep her there.
Well, once we have two more. Once we finish, we can go back and see if there's anything to
Yeah,
rearrange. So maybe you can
true.
talk your way to get your L and S.
Oh no, here we go. We have Zagara next, which we all know Legacy loves some Zagara.
That I do.
Um, I think that Zagara in the four man, usually if she's in the four man, even if she's like technically in the four man, she's usually offlaning. But she's not. She's usually not the offlaner. So like you usually have a Blaze or a Hogger with her, and she sort of controls her own lane, usually bottom side, and then you have the generic offlaner top side. Considering this tier list is an offlane tier list, I think that I would have to put her pretty low just because, she's very gankable from the offlane. She provides a lot in team fights, but I think that she's more of a four-man hero than an offlaner. So from purely offlane, I'd probably put her in like D, maybe C.
Sadly, I do have to agree. As much as I love Zagara, I think Zagara in the four man is pretty strong.
Agreed.
If
Yeah.
if left uncountered, can really be a pain to deal with. Zagara can provide the team a ton of vision. Ma can be a huge team fight swing. And then when you look at the percent damage that, I mean, really you can just throw anywhere on the map and they'll go find you value in the middle of a team fight with the roaches on 16 that I think she brings a lot in the four man. From a solo perspective, I think Zagara's best matchups are against off meta offlaners. When you look
Yep.
at offlaners like Blaze and Yrel, they have so much self-sustain that you can't really damage them to any good effect before they can clear the wave, and then they can go double soak where it might not be safe for you to do the same. And then you look at like a Hogger that can just clear the wave really fast. I think Zagara has pretty bad matchups into the strong offlaners. The creep does help with preventing ganks, but definitely a very gankable character. So sadly, I'd probably have to put Zagara in D.
Yeah. Definitely good in the four man though, in the right scenario. Or if there's like a Leoric or a Malthael, she's obviously very good in the 1v1 there.
Mm-hmm.
With those off meta offlaners, or if you just need the percent damage, like for example, versus like Deathwing, right? The percent damage, it's gonna help a lot at 16. But yeah, more of
Absolutely.
a four man hero. And last we have Zeratul. Zeratul is another one of those extremely high skill cap heroes. I think if you are extremely good at Zeratul, he is probably A tier, maybe arguably S tier, depending on the map and the matchup. Biggest weakness of Zeratul is he really needs to scale. So like early game, you're going to be pretty weak, especially in the off lane. You're going to be matching heroes that can clear the wave extremely fast, who can even threaten you and chunk you out. You really have to scale as Zeratul, either your Q build or your auto build. Either way, you're going to have to scale. But once you do scale, late game, absolutely insane, assuming you're playing him optimally. Uh, you can just solo kill people. You can threaten pretty much every offlaner if you are playing it well with the auto build. If you're Q build, you can bring extreme teamfight value, as well as double soak potential once you scale a little bit. Yeah, the biggest weakness is his early game is super weak, which is why I'm leaning probably A tier, just because of that early game.
Yeah, I think I would agree with A tier. Like you mentioned, to me, I think Zeratul doesn't really come online until like level 16. So, while he can do some things before then, that's when I think Zera really hits his spike. And if your team can be patient enough to not lose the game before then, I think Zeratul is extremely strong. I would say A tier.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so now we can look through these and adjust what we think. Do we want to just go down from like S down to F or
Yeah, I
vice
think that
versa?
sounds good.
All right. So looking at Blaze, I think it's easy to keep him at S for sure. Same with Dehaka, same with Hogger. I think those are all fine in S. I don't see any reason to change them.
Yep.
Next we have the A tier. Yrel, again, I think she might be S tier, but I think that we can keep her in A tier because of the camps. I think that's the biggest argument for why she wouldn't be S tier, because everything else I think she's great at. Also, I guess she does have to scale a little bit. Not as strong as the other ones early game. So A tier is good for her. Johanna, I think that's fine in A tier. Zeratul Vikings, we already went in depth about those. I think those are fine in A tier.
Yeah, I think
Uh,
from an A tier perspective, I agree. I think and S tier as well. I think all of those I think are pretty good. Yrel maybe being the main one that has a potential spot at S, but I think just in terms of the camping, maybe the one thing that sets her back.
I do think you can maybe argue that Johanna could be down a tier, but she is, I think, assuming that you're picking her in the right situation, she is very strong usually, even from the off lane. Brings a lot of team fight value, so I'm fine with keeping her in A. Uh, I think the reason we don't see it more often is just because if you're picking Johanna, usually you just have her as your tank and you're happy with that because she's super good there. If that wasn't the case, I think we would see her more in the off lane, but because that's the case, we don't see her too much in the off lane, but definitely very good. Looking at the B tier, Imperius, Leoric, Malthael, Rexxar, Sonya, Thrall. You have anything here that you would change?
Um, I think if anything, it would maybe be like Leoric up a tier, or it would be um, on looking at C. If any of those drop down to D, then it would maybe be bringing like Sonya and Thrall down to C. But I think a lot of those are pretty close together. That if it stayed, I wouldn't be against it. I don't know if you have thoughts.
Yeah, I think I like all those at B. I would change maybe one. I think maybe Thrall could go down to C because I do think he's more of a four-man hero. Similar to like Maiev and Kerrigan. Like I think both those heroes in the four-man can be absolutely insane, but from an off lane, I don't think it's really his best spot. Definitely situational though, so I like the C tier for him. I think the rest of them at B is perfectly fine. Um, I can see the Sonya maybe being lower, but I think Sonya is still pretty strong in the right scenario. I don't think she's that weak. So I like her in the B tier. Moving down to the C tier, we just moved Thrall there. I think that's good. D.Va, maybe arguably could go down a tier. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think um, she was one that was kind of in between C and D. I think her strengths being, we talked about C being situational,
Yeah,
and looking at how big this got, I think maybe C is the situational, but there's more situations, whereas D.Va feels like it's mostly like Infernal Shrines, or like,
yeah,
so the like situations are much smaller in number.
yeah.
Um,
Agreed there. I think D.Va, while on Infernal Shrine specifically, can be an okay pick. It's really only that map. Like any map that's not Infernal Shrines, I don't really want to see a D.Va on my team. I just don't. I think just doesn't bring enough anymore. The nerfs really hit her hard. So I think D is good for D.Va. Um, Deathwing, definitely more of a four-man hero. Uh, kind of makes me want to put him to D, but I think in the right scenario, he can be good in the off lane, like against the Rexxars. I think it's a little bit more situations where you can look for it, especially from like a last pick compared to the D.Va. So I think C tier is fair still. Chen, I think C is great for Chen. I think he has the specific scenarios where he can be strong. I think he's actually, pretty good in the right, maps, like non-wave clear oriented maps like BOE or the 1v1 maps like we already talked about. I think C is good. Arthas probably could lower him. I don't know what you think about that.
yeah, I think when I look at C, the one that stands out the most is Arthas, and then
Yeah.
the next one to me is like Maiev. That would be like potentially like, I think Maiev is strong, but I think I've seen so little Maiev offlane that
Yeah, I
while
agree with that.
while it may be okay, I've seen too little of it to really put it on the same tier as like a Thrall, Chen, those things that I've seen uh, plenty of times.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Um, yeah, I think the rest of C tier looks pretty good to me. I think those are all fine there. Going down to the D tier, Artanis, D.Va, Gazlowe, Qhira, Zag, Arthas, Maiev. What do you think of this tier?
Uh, I think it seems pretty good. I mean, I'm kind of looking at DNF combined, since
Yeah,
it would only be kind of swapping between those two, I think, unless you wanted to make an argument for Artanis up in C. That's the only one I could really think of is possibly moving up. But I think, to me, I look at the rest of this and I think I would keep it as it is, but I don't know if you feel
no,
otherwise or
I,
anything.
I, I agree. I think that the one I was maybe looking at moving down would be Qhira, just because that wave clear is so bad, and it really is an all-in hero. Like if you miss that skill shot, I think it really struggles. But I think she's stronger enough of the F tier heroes that I think keeping her in C is, or D rather, is fine. Um, so yeah, I think these are all good. Um, the last thing I would ask is, do you think we should like rate the heroes like left to right, so like left being the strongest and then right being like weaker?
Sure. Yeah, we could go back and do that. I
So this
think
will probably be the last thing we do. Um,
I
so
think
yeah,
for
Blaze
S tier I would
obviously
do
number one.
this way.
Yeah. Um,
Do you think Dehaka over Hogger, or Hogger over Dehaka? I think they're
I think
very similar. I think it just they
I think I
excel
would
in
put,
different things, so it's
yeah,
dependent
yeah,
on what you really
what you
want out
value.
of your comp, and what you
Yeah,
need. So, if you need the global and that versus, the camp clear, they excel in different ways. So
agreed.
I could see either way. I'll let you make the final call as the offlaner.
I think I would put Dehaka ahead. I think Dehaka is still extremely strong. It's just much harder to play, I would say. Well, maybe not. I think Hogger is also extremely hard to play, like optimally. But yeah, I think Dehaka is like the little CC that he has with his E into the drag pull up. I think can be super strong. Just requires a bit more, practice to get good at him. And that global is obviously always very good. So I would keep it like this. Looks good to me. A tier, I think I like it like that as it is.
I would agree.
B tier, I'd probably put Leoric for sure at the top there. I think. Probably Malthael up one as well. Rexxar, I'd probably put. I might even put Rexxar ahead of the Malthael. What do you think about that?
Uh,
Maybe
think
behind the
they're
Malthael.
yeah. I
I think
think that
either.
Rexxar and Malthael in my mind are very close. So yeah. So I
Yeah,
think you'll tend to see Rexxar more.
yeah. I think I like B tier like that. Looks good to me. Um, maybe Sonya up one, but you did talk about you didn't like Sonya too much, so I think keeping her there is fine. I also think Imperius has his situations where he can be pretty good. C tier, maybe. Honestly, it looks pretty good to me as is. I'm trying to find like something I'd change, but all of them look pretty good to me. Maybe Chen up one tier.
Yeah, I think overall, I think it looks good. I think
Maybe
maybe
ETC down one, or
I was gonna
even
say maybe Zool up one,
yeah, yeah, I
maybe
could see
like
that.
there.
Yeah, that looks good to me. I think Kerrigan can be insane, but very high skill hero. You have to really know what you're doing with her. Yeah, looks good to me. D tier, probably D.Va up one, I would say. I think that looks good. Maiev could go up a bunch, but it's hard to evaluate the offlane Maiev just because we don't really see it ever. Maev's obviously just an insane hero, but from the offlane perspective, lacking. Um, but
I
yeah,
think this is
I
the
think
order
that
I would
looks
go
good.
with.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with all of that. I think Qhira definitely at the bottom is good.
And the biggest
Um,
question is, where are the F tiers?
I'd put Varian at the front easily. I think Twin Blades Varian is actually not that bad, but it's still bad. It's the best of the F tiers. I think I'd put Murky ahead of the Butcher, to be honest. I mean, I guess you can argue Butcher, Lamb to the Slaughter can win games. What do you think between those two?
Yeah, it's basically I look at, are you gonna hit a impactful level 20 or is, the murky macro advantage gonna
I like
push?
the Murky right there. I think that, if you're really a good Murky, you can do some stuff. But I think you could be the best Butcher in the world and it's gonna be hard. So, um, yeah, I think this looks all pretty good to me.
Yeah, I think it looks good.
All right, well, that was a lot of fun. I'm glad we, made this list. Now we can, refer to this when we're drafting. This will be exactly how we draft. So hopefully none of our opponents, take a look at this. But
Yeah, hopefully
yeah,
you all can find this helpful as you're going into your Storm League games, that
yeah,
you can look at this and think back to some of the comments we talked about some of those situational heroes, about when you might think about them, and hopefully that helps you out.
yeah. Thanks for watching. Yeah. Any shout outs or like, links you want to put out, Legacy?
Shout out to 30K. You can
Yeah.
watch us on our matches during HeroesHearth on the weekends, and that's mainly it. I mean, I can shout out my Twitch is Legacy100, and my Twitter is Legacy_Hots.
Yeah, my Twitch and Twitter are Liam_Hots. Don't stream much nowadays, but who knows? Maybe I'll start soon. Maybe. We'll see.